Hey everyone, Firegross here, and today I'm going to be bringing you my guide to Trinity Shield Throw Radar. Trinity Shield Throw is a variant to Spectral Shield Throw that utilizes cheap conversion mechanics, scaled explode effects, and the alternate elemental ailments Brittle and Scorch in order to reach around 4 million Cirrus DPS on a mid-range budget of around 35 Exalted Orbs. I came up with this version of Shield Throw as a way to make the ability more accessible on a lower budget than what is typically required for cold conversion Shield Throw. For those who aren't aware, 35 Exalts into the cold conversion Shield Throw buys you little more than a Watcher's Eye, a skill gem, and a helmet, with the rest of the build requiring significantly larger investment of currency before the damage picks up and it starts to feel comfortable for farming high tier juiced maps. You should play this build if your League starter is a sufficient boss killer already and you simply want a second character to start farming high tier maps at a decent pace. Builds such as Forbidden Rite Totems, Spectre or Soul Rest Necros, and Trappers make for great boss killers, but you can often take upwards of 5 minutes to clear a single map. On the other hand, many of the top tier map farmer builds right now cost around 70 to 100 Exalted Orbs before they come online, posing a bit of a problem to many of you who don't wish to invest as hard. So whilst this build isn't exactly cheap at 35 Exalts, it's pretty cheap compared to many of the alternatives, and the playstyle is surprisingly a lot of fun once you fix the hitbox issues with explode effects. So with that said, let's get underway. So I'm just going to start with a very brief overview of the build's mechanics. Feel free to just sort of like pause this and go through it yourself if you want, but otherwise I'm going to keep it brief since there's a lot to cover. Basically, we are converting around half of our damage to cold via a influenced weapon and a thread of hope on the tree. We're converting about half of it to fire via our influenced weapon and an anointment. We're also getting around 29% Fizz's Extra Cold via hatred. We're getting approximately 38% Fizz's Extra Fire via Herald of Ash and influenced amulet and the anointment. And the result is that we're getting around 48 to 54% of our damage as cold and 46 to 52% of our damage as fire damage. Then we get a lot of generic penetration. We get 4% via Command of Elements on the tree, 5% via Primeval Force, 6% via Forces of Nature. We then get our 20% exposure via Avatar of the Veil. We get another 20 to 30% via Scorch, which is an alternate fire ailment, so we don't ignite in this build, we Scorch instead. And we get that via our weapon, which I'll show you a little later on, and then we get up to 16% via the Trinity support gem. On top of that, because we are applying Brittle instead of Chill or Freeze, we're also getting 10 to 15% bonus crit at any given time. It's usually around 15%, but some map bosses with map mods that give them extra life, you're probably only going to get to around 10 or 11% bonus crit, although dealing double damage via your crit clusters sort of helps bump this up a little bit. And then finally for the explodes, there's a lot to really cover there, but I guess the gist of it is that we're dealing about 2.5% of life as cold, 2.5% life as fire, so about 5% base life as elemental damage. That damage is then fully penetrating, and against white mobs with no resistance, we're getting 81% more damage. We're getting 10 to 15% chance to crit on our explodes. Now, explodes usually don't have any crit chance, but because of the way we're utilizing Brittle, these explodes can crit for up to 5.6 times the normal damage. On top of that, we're getting 35% increased AoE via a medium cluster jewel, although that's optional, and then up to 32% more damage via frenzy charges. So on average, that equates to dealing around 20% of a mob's life as fire and cold damage. We'll do a quick rundown of the tree here. So we're just going to come out here through the life part. It's not really worth going here, especially since this build is starved for life. We come up here and pick up Primal Spirit. Now, we don't really get this just for the Flask charges. We're also getting it for the Strength and Int. This build has a pretty high Strength and Int requirement usually, and you want to get it where you can. We're going to come across here to Precise Interception, and then we're going to come down here and pick up the Crystal Skin clusters. Now, I know other versions of Spectral Shield Throw run Ailment Avoidance via pieces of gear, but it's pretty hard for us to fit that sort of stuff in on our gear. It's easy to just spend the 5 points down here and then run the rest of the avoidance via Avatar of the Veil. And you're also picking up some up here via Thick Skin and this node, but I don't think that's really necessary. I think you reach 100% without that. So we come down here. Now, you don't have to get this unless you're like sort of level 95. These three nodes here are probably the least important nodes on the entire tree, but they do give you 45% increased flask duration, and when I cover the flasks later on, you'll sort of understand why I've chosen to include this as a part of the build and not something that, you know, is just a sort of optional thing. We come across here, we're going to pick up Primeval Force. That's part of our generic elemental resistance penetration that I was talking about. We pick up all the life nodes, we pick up all the accuracy nodes, we pick up all the crit nodes, we pick up the frenzy charge, and then we're going to run a small thread of hope, and we're going to get Winter Spirit, Weapon Artistry, Aspect of the Links, and Forces of Nature. Now, the thing to keep in mind with all this is that if you don't hit double tier 1 conversion on your weapon, which is again something we're going to touch later, then you want to take this node here, weapon cold damage, to provide an extra 20% fizz converted to cold damage, right? But if you do hit double tier 1, then you don't need this. You're going to hit 100% fizz to elemental conversion without that node. Alright, so moving on up here, we're going to get Acro and Phase Acro. Now, we do run a decent amount of energy shield and block, and that is getting reduced via acrobatics here, but it's still worth taking these nodes and running them in conjunction to the block and the energy shield. We end up fairly tanky. Even though this build runs only about 4.5 to 5k EHP total, you still rarely die. I easily got this character to level 95. I fully anticipate getting to level 96 within a few days, most likely, providing I don't take too many risks. It hardly ever dies unless I'm really playing stupid. But you know, while you're in the map and while you're fighting, not many hits actually get through to your character, and the ones that do, they get mitigated very heavily because you're also running Fortifier and a number of other tools. Alright, so this is our cluster jewel. I'm going to provide links for these in the spreadsheet that I provide, so you don't have to worry about figuring out what to do with the clusters, but the gist of it is you want something that looks like this: Feed the Fury, Fuel the Fight, and Martial Prowess, or perhaps Calamitous, stuff like that. Quick Getaway and Pressure Points is kind of the ideal medium crit cluster jewel. Now here's the thing, there are a bunch of other nodes that are worthwhile taking because we're going to run the crit support gems. So in the link I provide in my spreadsheet, you can sort of go through that on your own and figure out which cluster jewels you want, but I have provided a link to a sort of generic cluster jewel that gets any two of, I think, the 4 or 5 notables that are worth taking, so you don't have to figure that out if you don't want to. We're going to run an Enduring Composure small cluster. Now, if you follow my other builds, you know that I include this on pretty much every build. It's a very broken defensive mechanic, and you're going to run this in conjunction with Immortal Core, Cast when damage taken. This is just going to mean every time you get hit, you generate endurance charges, and then you're going to consume them. You get massive amounts of fizz and elemental damage reduction for about 2.5 seconds. Now down here you can run another crit cluster, or you can run an AoE cluster. I'll just show you what that looks like on my own character. So that's going to be Magnifier and Assert Dominance. Gives you 35% increased AoE while you're clearing, and we're mostly taking that just pretty much to scale our explodes. It makes our explodes much nicer. It provides an extra layer of safety when you're clearing maps, since a lot more things die. It allows you to chain explode around corners, and it's just really, it's very nice and a very noticeable buff to your map clear, but it's not necessary. If you'd rather have more boss damage, you just run to crit setups. So, and then you're going to run, of course, like a Watcher's Eye or something in here. The Watcher's Eye we run is an attack damage while affected by precision Watcher's Eye, since it's kind of the best bang for our buck. It's fairly cheap. Come up here, you get the life nodes, you get the frenzy nodes. You're going to go here and pick up the jewel node here, because we kind of need extra int into our setup, and it's just sort of efficient to get it up here. I would recommend putting a Corrupted Blood jewel in here. You don't really need to care about many of the other things on there, but getting other nodes such as accuracy rating is definitely nice. It's definitely going to help you hit your 100% hit chance, since we do get a little starved in this build. Okay, now down here, Command of the Elements, self-explanatory, gives us a bunch of damage. In fact, it gives us a lot of damage going here. Pick up the life nodes here. You don't need these 2 life nodes. You can get them if you're higher level, of course, but you don't really need it. You're going to get Wind Dancer, a very great defensive tool. I'm going to pick up the int node here. You can pick up the strength node here if you need it, but you shouldn't usually need it. Going to get Point Blank here. This is pretty important. It just adds a lot of damage, and it's also the reason why you want to be up close when you're killing bosses. You can sit back and kill bosses at a distance, but if you want to kill bosses fast, just sit right on top of the boss and hit them. Point Blank is going to, help you destroy them fairly easily. Come up here, you get Savagery, and then you're going to get Retaliation and Gladiatorial Combat. Gladiatorial Combat is one of our best nodes on the entire tree. It's giving around 10% DPS, as you can see here. So pretty big. Disciple of Slaughter, same deal. Very important node, and all the things that you get along the way are fairly important. And then gonna get these life nodes, and finally the Seething Fury jewel. This jewel is very important. As you can see, removing it would cost us 47% of our damage. This is kind of the core of the entire build, and I think we'll get into it. You'll see a little later why when we talk about the gear, but you absolutely need this jewel. Now, because it's a cheap jewel, you can pick up Corrupted Blood immunity on this one and then free up your jewel socket, say up here, for something else. It's up to you. I'll let people figure that out depending on their own budget and what they want. Now, as for ascendancies, we want to just go for Avatar of the Veil and Avatar of the Slaughter. In the past, I didn't like getting Avatar of the Veil. I preferred to just go get Rapid Assault, but Rapid Assault was nerfed, and even though Avatar of the Veil was nerfed too, I feel that the bonuses on this are not only more relevant for our build, where we're getting the generic exposure, something our build desperately needs, but also the ailment avoidance is far more important in the current metagame and with the changes that have been made to Flasks and immunities. So this is just sort of it's necessary to run this. There's no other option than going this way. Definitely do not go for Avatar of the Chase or Rapid Assault. So I'm going to go through the gear, but I'm going to talk about the three most important pieces of our gear first, and these three pieces are very, very, very important, very core to our build, but they're also very hard to acquire. You can't just necessarily buy them off the trade site. I mean, at least in the shield's case you can, but the body armor and the weapon may be a little more complicated, and if you do buy them off the trade site, they're going to cost you way more than what it's going to cost to craft on your own. Fortunately, I'm going to go through all of that in this guide. So I'm just going to start off with the weapon. The weapon is really like the centerpiece of the build, just as much as the shield. You're getting an alternating scepter, which you're going to acquire. It's a high space, it's always going to come uninfluenced, and you're going to slap a Crusader orb onto it, and then you're going to spam it with Jagged Fossils until it hits Fizz converted to cold and Fizz converted to fire. Now, you don't need tier 1 in both of them, you can just take tier 2 for both, and in the case that you don't get tier 1 for both of them, as explained before, you're going to just run both of these conversion nodes here, because that's going to help you add up to 100%, and you don't need to get it with an exactly 50-50 split. However, because you are getting 20% from your Anoint and 20% from Winter Spirit, if you do happen to hit double tier 1 on here, you can divine it until you get 30-30, and then that's your 100% Fizz to Elemental conversion. You don't have to worry about taking that extra node. But, that said, it's going to take you around 90 Jagged Fossils to hit double conversion with just tier 2, so don't stress it, and just take whatever you get when you hit it. And this is basically what it comes out looking like. So on this one, I've also just gotten lucky and gotten Fizz as extra lightning. Now, this is actually fairly beneficial for this build because the Fizz is extra lightning. The lightning damage penetrates entirely thanks to my generic elemental penetration. So it's actually quite a big bonus to my damage, but it's definitely not necessary at all. I would recommend crafting elemental damage with attacks as a prefix, but if you do have an open suffix, consider slapping a resistance on. I fortunately just hit 42% fire resistance naturally on this one, so that's pretty nice. But that's all there is to the weapon. It's just a matter of getting a Crusader Exalted Orb, slapping it onto an alternating scepter, and then spamming Jagged Fossils until you hit double conversion. Okay, body armor. This one's a little more complicated. I'm gonna, by the way, just before we cover the rest of this, I do have a spreadsheet in the description of the video, and it's going to show you the crafting steps for every one of these items. So you're going to get the weapon crafting, you're going to get the shield crafting, and the body armor crafting. Okay, so the way you get this body armor is you're going to acquire the two bases that I specify in the spreadsheet. You're going to apply harvest rerolls to them until you get the hunter attack crit and the succored attacks have -15 to total mana cost on the respective body armor bases. You're going to awaken slam them together, and then you're going to lock suffixes and do a hunter reroll for caster mods, and that's going to apply the +1 curse. The reason the +1 curse is very important is because when you run Asenath's Gentle Touch, it's going to be applying Temporal Chains. Now, if you're applying Temporal Chains, you can no longer apply Assassin's Mark, and this is a crit-based build. It's very important that we can apply both Assassin's Mark and Temporal Chains to, at the same time. So we basically need this body armor as it is. The socket attacks of -15 total mana cost ensures that we can get a higher level precision in order to cap our accuracy, in addition to the Hatred and the Herald of Ash, which we need. So if you really, really, really want, you can just get an attack crit and an additional curse body armor, and then run Replica Conqueror's efficiency somewhere else for the reduced cost of attack skills. But I really would recommend doing it this way because, as you can see, Spectral Shield Throw's mana cost is 8, and we pretty much can't run out of mana unless we unless you're doing something horribly wrong. Pretty much never going to run out of mana like this. As for the shield, you want a Supreme Spiked Shield item level 86+, and then you just want to spam the hell out of Dense Fossils onto it until you hit a nice combination of prefixes. of course, sorry, beforehand, but you want to apply perfect fossils to get it close to 30% quality, and then once you're done applying the dense fossils, you then apply 18% extra quality as a crafted suffix. That's going to bump it up to 48% quality. Now, if you do hit 28% quality on your perfect fossils and you sort of run out and you just want to run with it, you can always use Hillock to force it the rest of the way up to 30% base quality. Or you could do this after the fact. You could do it before instead of perfect fossils. I'll kind of leave that up to you. There's a more detailed guide in the spreadsheet. Okay, as for the rest of the items, we want a Spectral Shield Throw Helm enchant. You don't need the expensive one because we use explodes. It's not actually very important that we get as many shards as possible. So just getting the basic one is going to cost only a few X, and you can sort of be a little picky and perhaps find one that has life, resistance, and an open suffix for a second resistance, as I've done here. This was just 2 exalts, and I managed to get a base that was kind of decent enough to put 4 red sockets on it. You may need to be a little picky. You probably don't want to get an evasion base, because then you're going to have trouble doing socket colors, but I will leave that with you. Moving on, SNS Gentle Touch. This is another important item. Now, you don't have to get it corrupted like I have, but the corrupted version that I have only cost 4 exalts, more than the base 6 that these gloves usually cost. So they will set you back 6 exalts, but they provide the explodes, and that is really amazing for our clear. I wouldn't recommend any other gloves, and if we did have other gloves, we'd have an entirely different setup. We'd be probably running the Lion Eye body armor and then conversion gloves, and then we'd run a different weapon. It would be a slightly higher DPS setup, but the explodes make your clear really, really nice, especially when you're running juiced maps. I have tried it both ways, and I definitely prefer it with the SNS Gentle Touch, which is why I've made the build around it. Moving on, the Nomad Studded Belt. Now, you can't just run a Headhunter, right? If you have a Headhunter, I know most of you don't, right? But some of you have been asking me, you want a build that scales well with a Headhunter. This build scales really well with a Headhunter. Scaling fizzes elemental buffs, it has generic elemental penetration. This build is great with a Headhunter, and guess what? The Nomad is giving you strength and dex to hit requirements and whatnot, so does a Headhunter. So basically, the Nomad is like the budget version of, what you should run in the belt slot. You can run a Stygian Vice with some Flask-related stuff, although I don't feel you need it. The Nomad does, a lot of heavy lifting on its own. Every stat on the Nomad is useful to you. You get strength, global fizz damage, which then gets scaled as fizz is extra cold, fizz is extra fire, dexterity, increased projectile damage, and then some all res. Now, the thing is, you may not be able to obtain the all res. It's kind of up to you, and it really depends on what you want to do with your build, whether you are committed to running the Nomad or you want a Stygian or a Headhunter. But if you do run the Nomad and you do want the resist on it, make sure that you hit 200 strength. I am not. I don't need the resist, as you can see, so it's not really a problem. Although I could benefit from 1 extra cold res, but that's neither here nor there. Dark Ray Vectors, very simple, 1C boots. They're really great. We scale dodge, we scale movement speed with them, +1 frenzy charge, which is great. Get some lightning res. This is a great item. I would not recommend anything else unless you're going to be willing to invest 40 exalts into like Tailwind, Elusive, Onslaught, Elevated boots. At that point, you're buying boots that cost more than this entire build put together. Okay, next up is the Influenced Amulet. Now, this can be a Warlord or an Elder Amulet. Either way works. You want Magmatic Strikes anointed on it. This is going to give us some extra fire conversion, fizzes extra fire damage, and increased fire damage with attack skills. That's all great. And then what you want on it is tier 1 fizzes extra fire damage rolled onto the item, and then you can put Turbulent Catalyst to anoint it all the way up to 18% fizzes extra fire damage. Ideally, you do want to look for some other good stats. You may want to look for int to hit your int requirements. You may want to get some resistance, crit multi, as you can see here. I've kind of got it all. And be mindful of the base as well. I picked an Onyx Amulet because I wanted some extra strength and int into the build. And then finally, we just get some very basic rings. Life, resistance, and there's plenty of room to get accuracy rating, strength, int, depending on what you want. Though I do recommend Vermilion rings for the extra % increased max life. As you can see, I am sitting at a very comfortable about 4.6, 4.7k EHP total, and I almost never die. I had absolutely no trouble leveling this character up to 95. It looks squishy, but it's not. This is actually one of the tankiest characters I've played, in recent months. It's very deceptive how tanky it gets on this low amount of HP, so definitely would recommend Vermilion in order to scale that. I just realized this is going to be a very long video, so I'm going to try and speed it up. We're going to cover the gems as quickly as possible. Going to cover the one most important part in all this: Phantasmal Spectral Shield Thrower. So Phantasmal Spectral Shield Thrower scales crit multi based on your maximum energy shield. Now, since you want a shield that has at least 300 energy shield, this is going to be giving you 60 extra crit multi. This is a huge buff to your damage. It's about 10% of your damage alone. Now, I would say not to worry about getting it, but it's kind of up to you. This gem costs about 8 exalts, and if the extra 10% damage isn't worth it, you don't get it. But the thing I would point out is that I'm presenting you the build at the level of budget at which it started to feel comfortable for me. 35 exalts was about the point at where I started feeling like I could kill bosses, quickly enough before they could get in enough attacks to eventually get one through my dodge and my evasion and, kill me. I really would recommend Phantasmal Spectral Shield Thrower. It scales your damage really nicely, and it's going to give you just that extra bit of DPS that you need to kill bosses before they can touch you a lot of the time. If you don't want to, just get a regular Spectral Shield Thrower, see how you go. That is going to drop the budget of this build right down to 27x, which makes it a lot more easier to approach. If you're not interested in killing bosses like within 3 to 4 seconds, maybe just start off with a basic Spectral Shield Thrower gem, and then you can sort of decide when you want to upgrade, if you want to upgrade, that sort of thing. Alright, moving on. We want increased crit damage support, we want Trinity support, we want increased crit strike support, then we want elemental damage with attacks and anomalous, or we just want inspiration support, but anomalous inspiration goes very nicely with our build. One thing to keep in mind is the reason I picked the loricated ringmail was so that I could get the socket colors much easier. If you do go with an astral plate, you're looking at 4 off colors. It may be a little expensive and difficult to color your sockets, but I'm going to leave that one up to you. Okay, utility gems. We're going to run faster attacks with shield charge and fortify. This is a pretty standard setup for a lot of the builds that use shields at the moment, and it's always been that way. We're going to run custom damage taken, immortal core, increased duration, and then you can kind of run enduring cry. Now, the reason I have enduring cry is because I'm doing juiced maps, and particularly nemesis maps. If I'm doing those maps and there's a lot of desecrated ground on the floor, I run out of flasks pretty quickly, and then I start to die slowly while I'm looting. So enduring cry just sort of helps you bump your life up in a pinch when you're out of life loss. You don't need this. This is probably like the one gem that I would say is not necessary at all. You can put a portal gem in here if you want. Next up is Herald of Ash, Precision, and Hatred. These are our 3 auras. I wouldn't say that it's required at all to run them with Enlighten, but you can if you want. Enlighten's very expensive, so I would recommend not. Next up, we want Arcanist Brand with Sniper's Mark, Hydrosphere, and increased duration support. This is just a nice thing to sort of put our utilities down with a single click. The increased duration support makes all the things here last longer. It's going to make your Arcanist Brand last longer, and then the Hydrospheres and Sniper's Mark that the Arcanist Brand is casting also lasts longer. So really only 1 click per boss, and nothing more to say there. Something, though, I will point out is with Hydrosphere, the way Hydrosphere works and why we're running it is so that when you fire the Spectral Shield Thrower at the boss, the Spectral Shield Thrower hits the boss, it then chains to Hydrosphere. Hydrosphere is the last target, so then it explodes into shards. The shards then hit the boss and deal 50% additional damage. Some people get this the wrong way around, and I really must stress, don't hit the Hydrosphere first. Now, you don't have much of a choice. It's very hard to sort of hit the Hydrosphere when it's being cast kind of on the boss with Arcanist Brand, but nonetheless, always do your best to aim your Spectral Shield Thrower at the boss and let it chain to Hydrosphere, not the other way around. Okay, I see way too many people on the streams and in gameplay footage making this mistake, firing at the Hydrosphere. You don't want to do that. That will result in less DPS. Okay, moving on, we have a Ancestral Protector, multiple totem support with Culling Strike, and then Decoy Totem. Now, the multiple totem support isn't very necessary, but the reason I'm running it is simply because having 2 Ancestral Protectors out means that if one gets clipped with a bit of damage or whatever, then the other one's up. The whole point of this is just to give you more attack speed. It's really nice. Culling Strike support means that it's going to attack the boss and cull the boss for you, and then the Decoy Totem is just sort of there in case you really feel you need it. If you want to kill Conquerors, it's very helpful to just place down a Decoy Totem and let them tank the boss. And yeah, that's our gem setup for this character. Now, before we wrap up, I'm going to just talk very briefly about Flasks. There is an easy way to sort of set your Flasks up so that they work really nicely, and I'm going to go through that. This is what I would recommend. if you don't want to do it, you don't have to. You can just sort of skip over this section. But so what I would first off recommend is setting up 3 flasks and the following flasks with I believe instilling orbs, so that they are used when charges reach full. You want this on all 3 of them: Quicksilver, Quartz, and Silver Flask. Now, the Silver Flask you can replace with an At Series Promise if you end up getting an Onslaught on Hit Synthesized Ring, which is an upgrade that you can get later on. But the thing is, before you do that, although some people would think the At Series Promise being Fizz and Elemental as extra Chaos would be stronger than Onslaught, turns out At Series Promise was nerfed enough that it's actually not better than a Quartz Flask, so a Silver Flask, sorry. So you're gonna run these 3. And then you want to also roll onto them reduced charges used. Now, the other mods, the suffix mods, don't really matter, but the whole purpose of this is that by having reduced charges used and then used when charges reach full, means that in combination with the Nomad giving increased flask charges gained, and then also getting increased flask charges gained from Primal Spirit, and then in addition to 45% increased flask duration, your flasks are basically constantly up throughout the map. If you go through the initial montage at the start of my video, you can see that the flasks are just constantly refreshing before they even drop below halfway through their duration. And I don't even have glass blowers baubles on these. These are just with the 4-second base duration. So this basically ensures that you get all 3 of these buffs permanently, which is really, really nice. Now, the last 2 flasks that we do need to talk about are the Seething Life Flask of Staunching. Of course, you want this. You always want this. This is your bleed removal, and you can sort of chug this for instant life recovery. Okay, the final flask I want to talk about is kind of a special one. It's the Ample Diamond Flask of the Order. So when you unveil Cinderswallow Urns, you can unveil increased crit strike chance during flask effect. Unveiling this also unlocks it at the bench, which means that whenever you put a flask into your crafting bench, you can then craft this on as a suffix. Now, you're going to craft this onto a diamond flask and then apply enkindling orbs on it until it hits 46 to 50% increased effect, and you get what pretty much I've gotten on this flask. Now, my flask is giving me 220% increased global crit strike chance during flask effect. Thanks to the maximum charges and whatnot, I'm getting that for a base of just about 15 seconds. Although, if you recall, I also have increased flask charge duration, so I can get close to around 22 seconds worth of 222% crit chance, and that's giving me a very similar effect to a lucky crit flask. So, in a way, crit flasks kind of got stronger. Now, this isn't going to be up during the map. Of course, you can pop it if you get to a high health rare or an essence monster or whatever. But basically, I just keep this on, and it never triggers and never does anything until I get to a boss, and then I pop it at the boss, and I have 20 plus seconds of near capped crit thanks to this flask. This is really important. It's a massive boost to our damage, and I really recommend going out of your way to craft one exactly like this. So before we wrap up, I just wanted to refresh your memory about the spreadsheet that I'm putting in the description below. It's got a link to every single item that is in the build, so you can just punch these trade links straight into your browser windows, and you'll get, so I'll just show you right here. You punch it in, and then you're gonna get, a bunch of Seething Fury listings. The cluster jewels pretty much work in the same way, so you don't have to do any thinking yourself. You just punch these links into your browser window, and you're gonna get the item that you want. I'll just give you another example. I'm gonna punch a crit one in, and it's gonna bring up a bunch of 4 to 5 passive crit clusters with only the notables that we want, which in this case are Basics of Pain, Quick Getaway Pressure Points, and Eye of the Storm. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, and there's also crafting guides, just to remind you, for each of the items that need to be crafted in our build, step-by-step instructions. There's also trade links to the items that you're going to be needing. So there you have it. There is my Trinity shield throw guide. I'm sorry it took so long. You guys know how I like being as thorough as possible and explaining every facet of the build. I'm having a lot of fun with this character. I'm probably going to continue having fun with this character. I don't think I want to reroll anytime soon. I'm probably just going to keep playing this for the next few weeks even. I never believed I would have this much fun on a shield throw character, but it's great. I think I owe a lot of it to the way I've scaled explosions. I love explosions, and this character, scales explosions fairly nicely. Not the craziest explosion scaling character I've ever had. That was probably the Winter Orb assassin from last league, which had, I think something like 100% increased area of effect and could just blow up like 2 screens at a time. But this is as good as you're going to get on a raider, I think. So you know, it's definitely been very, very nice. I hope you guys found this guide helpful. If you need any further help or you just want to watch additional gameplay, feel free to hit me up on stream. I stream 7 days a week. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have, help you out in any way I can, even do PoE reviews if that's sort of up your alley. For now, however, I need to wrap things up since this video went way overboard in terms of how long it was supposed to be, so I guess give me a like, comment, and subscribe if you found the video helpful, and I'll see you guys in the next one.